Hello everyone, it is Mike Levin on Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Around 8 a.m. I did my grocery shop and I'm heading back home. I have been flipping a little chicken and egg problem over in my head about how to create category pages from this Jekyll system, which is so beautiful because you don't really have to run anything the way it works with Github. You don't need to do your Jekyll site generation on your own machine. You just put markdown files in a GitHub repo. And it sounds fancy, but all it's saying is you put text files into this thing that you push up remotely, and those text files magically expand out into your formatted website. And that's the beauty of the thing, so that you don't have to have the tech liability locally. You don't have to install Jekyll on your local machine. If something doesn't work right when you push it up because you're trying to do something fancy, GitHub sends you an email. It used to be extremely uninformative, but of late they've been getting better at telling you what went wrong in the site generation process, which is frankly still worlds better than the extra tech liability of having Jekyll installed locally, generating them locally just so that it'll look, so you can see what it'll look like when you push it up. It's better to just not have all that in your life. I've been resisting it. I may end up doing it eventually, but I'm still not quite ready yet. However, this means I can't do these custom little Ruby built, modules, extensions, plugins, what have you, where you could just walk through your categories and spit out a different page for each category. Now, it occurs to me there's a number of ways I probably could do this. I could do this completely in Python because I'm detecting categories as I go. In order to create these prev next arrows, I'm detecting categories. I could also make a simple Ruby page that walks through all the categories just the way the arrow does and outputs a file website, hosted on the site itself, that is a list of all the categories, which I could go out with HTTP and fetch that. That's a little bit too many moving parts for my taste. So I suppose what I'm really thinking of doing is, as the blog slicer part of this thing does its work and it encounters categories that are, part of the blog posts, category : category name, I will collect those into a file, which is then run. It's going to be a Python file. I'll collect those into an executable Python file. Let's see. Maybe I collect them into a file that Python can load. So I write those out. I write those out as a JSON file or a text file or a CSV or what have you. So then I could have a pre-release step which writes out all the different category pages. Now those category pages need to be linked into. They should not exist in a vacuum. So knowing what the URL structure of those category pages are can be used in the blog pages themselves where the category is named. So when it says category : my life stories, I can hyperlink that to a file that I know will be in location. It's a good approach. It's a good approch. So every repo that has such a blog in it, which is all my sites, my static site generator system that sits on top of Jekyll, which sits on top of GitHub pages, will have a feature by which it parses out the categories, lists out the categories, creates a categories.csv file. At the time it slices the blog posts into their separate HTML or into their separate Markdown file. So one giant journal.md gets sliced and diced into a whole bunch of properly named, for the Jekyll posts system, a bunch of individual Markdown files. At the time that's done, it will have spun through and be aware of the categories it encountered, so it'll drop a categories.csv file into the repo. It'll be part of the repo. And then the parent file that actually calls the slicer, because Blog Slicer used to be its own separate thing. Now it's part of a repo I call Skite, S-K-I-T-E, static site generator, Skite. It's also a British word for, I forget exactly what, but it resonated when I read it. It had something to do with, a person. It's along the lines of a Git. It made me think of the way Linus named his distributed version control system, Git. Skite is in the very similar sense. So Skite has this thing that used to be Blog Slicer, a separate repo. I've incorporated it in. It's now slice.py. In notebook form, it's 10_slice.ipynb, but because of nbdev, it outputs that as a package, slice.py. And so my release system is really calling slice.py from skite.py. So skite.py is kind of the parent file, and it does the pre-processing, the post-processing, but along the way, it calls slice.py through the Unix/Linux API. I'm keeping all this kind of flexible and modular, so it can be glued together different ways, so that different pieces of it can be run individually from the Unix/Linux command line. For modularity, for debugging, there's a lot of interesting benefits that come from it. So after slice.py is called, I can do a post-processing step. You hear these things called hooks all the time. Everything has hooks. Pre-hooks, post-hooks, it's just things are run in a certain order. Something has control of the order in which those things run. That thing that has control can either be doing the running or delegating the running to other things. And one of the things that those controllers of the process can do is create pre-process hooks and post-process hooks, looking in known locations and running the contents of those directories. It's so common. It is, in fact, the way the Linux and Unix startup procedures work these days. Things are just put into locations that imply different run levels and sequential orders and stuff. And that's all it is. It's putting text into text files and putting those text files into the right locations so that they are recognized and registered and run as at the right time, at the right place. So I'm doing just the same thing. That's what all of tech is. I talk about tech is text, and text is tech, and it's all just tricks, and it's all often the same tricks. These are the tricks. There's conventional behavior, the directories where you put things in, the file naming conventions to control what order things are run in. And they're all always similar tricks, if not exactly the same. And so you learn those tricks, and you make your systems abide by those tricks. When you make systems, you use those same tricks. And when you use other systems, you make sure you're using systems whose tricks are clear and exposed to you and not wrapped up in too much proprietary cosmetics, syntactic sugar. obfuscation. Obfuscation is often done so that you feel like you're doing something very special and it's very innovative. But in actuality, you're doing the exact same thing that every other system does in almost exactly the same way. And if you were just moving around in directories in a Unix or a Linux terminal and editing and moving files with Unix and Linux commands, and editing the contents of those files with VI or Vim or Emacs, you would be a generic tech person who could just handle anything all the time. When you need new systems, you can just spin them out quickly using the exact same patterns. And when you encounter new systems, you can start using them to great effect very quickly. And so that's what I'll be doing now. I'm just going to be, during the process, I'm going to be creating a few more files that will be put certain places by certain naming conventions. In certain conventional places, names certain conventional things, which post-processing hooks will come in, read that file, and spit out a bunch of other files so that the links to those files that were already made earlier in the process are not 404. They're not leading to empty links. In fact, I'll probably construct the links first. It's probably, after I put away groceries, it's probably the first thing I'll do. It's still an hour before the workday starts, and I'm going to try and get as much of this in as possible. And even once the workday starts, I am waiting on a couple of things before I can do my next step. So this is very work related. I might power this thing through and get my category pages up and running, which will be the last thing now to make my Skype system 80-20 rule complete. I will have put in the 20% of the effort to get me 80% of what I want in a content management system, benefit-wise. There are a few little bits to iron out. Like I mentioned in the last video, the main index file on a blog can get pretty long. I don't have so much content on any of my sites yet that I've encountered that problem, but it will get there. So, coming up with a way to paginate through long lists of blog links might be something, although pagination is generally a bad idea. Next 10 is how Blogger did it in the past, where you just dig deeper. It's just another version of pagination. Everything is a version of pagination. Maybe I break it down by months. Maybe, every month gets its own index page. Yeah, doing it by time, having a calendar. The most recent, and then everything older gets broken down by year. A year could be simple enough. I'll never have so many blog posts in a single year that page will be so long. So everything from this year, and it's accumulating up, and a new year rolls over, that wouldn't be good, because on a new year then it's blank. So it probably would have to be the last 100 blog posts, and then links by year. And the current year might be a particularly long page past the first 100 links, and every year might be a particularly long page. That's where the long link dilution can be allowed to occur, because it's not your main index page. All your most current articles, and maybe some selection of pinned up ones. Maybe I'll have a tag. Maybe I'll use categories and tags, and tags will have a pinning attribute, whereas categories have a navigational arrow way that they manifest their behavior. Categories let you read things in sequential order within that category, and tags will allow certain things to be perhaps pinned up on certain index pages at the top, so that they don't get pushed deeper as it gets past that top 100, say, or so that I could even dig further into the previous years and pin those articles up at the top of the index pages. So those are violations of the 80-20 rule. Those are not things I need to think about right now. Those are things that will come organically in time, because this is a living system, and all the code to accomplish all this is like yay big. Very little code to pull all this off, let me tell you. And this is the cutting of the catapult ropes to release the build-up potential, very much thanks to the fact that all these other systems are there doing the heavy lifting and insulating you from the complexity underneath, as a good system should, exposing through their APIs, because everything is just repackaging APIs, transforming APIs into a better, more usable form. This for humans concept is a lot of places in Python. The requests package is HTTP for humans. It uses variations on the URL lib, because Python has had a bunch of URL libs which support all the edge cases, and edge cases call for APIs that violate the 80-20 rule. It's the 80% of the things that you need to learn to get to what you need to do 20% of the time, and it's really, really painful using object-oriented notation for creating your HTTP request headers. And so requests comes along and just spins the API a little bit differently, you see. That's what all these systems do. Even though Ruby is underneath the Jekyll system, and really hardly need to do any Ruby. There's a templating system that exposes some Ruby, but there's always a templating system that exposes some logic. And it's not as hard as the language that the template system is based on. You just need to know a few things, and you follow their copy and paste examples, and that's usually enough. That's what I'm using with the prev next arrows, and that's what I'll be doing with these category pages. So anyway, that should be all I have to say about that. I'll be doing that work. Maybe I'll live cast it, depending on the timing. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, all that stuff.